So, welcome to the Ramsden podcast. And today we've got a special guest. Robert Grillo is here to talk to us about political activism and about the organization that you run the organization, right? Slaughter Free Chicago. You are the founder and you're running it, correct?
Yes.
So, really excited to have you here, man, and to get into what you're trying to do in Chicago and other cities as well, I believe, and to talk about political animal rights activism, an area that I think I don't know too much about, and I think a lot of listeners also maybe don't know too much
Yeah.
about. So before we get into it, do you want to give us a bit of an intro, a flavor for who you are and a bit of your background?
Yeah. Be happy to. So in 2009, I started out getting involved in kind of, looking at what was out there in terms of different types of activism. I think there were even cubes of truth back then, which is going back quite a bit. There were, there
Yeah.
was PETA, there were protests, there was a fur-free day in Chicago that was big. So I started, just dabbling in different types of activism at the time. I had gone vegan in 2009 too. And
Mhm.
I didn't really, at that point, I was just kind of new to it and realized that I had a lot to learn. Of course, I still do. Of course, every day is kind of a learning experience. But uh, I then launched a website, Free from Harm, before we started the nonprofit because I thought what I
Mhm.
could bring to the movement would be the skills I have with website development and design. And I decided to create a website that could carry a lot of content and help, people in our movement, as well as people just curious about the movement and the general public as well. I just, educate and inform
Mhm.
about the various subjects related to what we're doing. And that went on pretty well for several years. And I would say then, starting in about 2016, after I wrote the book in 2016, the book Farm to Fable, I decided that
Mhm.
I wanted to get involved in something more hands-on, more grassroots. I was learning more about grassroots activism, and I decided, I really have to kind of delve into that somehow. So I thought about it for a while, and
Mhm.
then it came to me. The slaughter free idea came to me in 2017 when I realized here we are in a city that used to actually promote itself as the slaughter capital of the world. And the Chicago
Mm.
Union Stockyards became this huge, the largest industrial meat packing and slaughter complex in the world at the time. And it flourished for several decades through the 70s. So we have this legacy of slaughter as the backbone, if you will, of the economy of the city. And the history books, and generally speaking, most people project a very popular, positive image of of of
Mm.
the Union Stockyards. And the reality was, though, that there was a there was a famous writer called Upton Sinclair who wrote a book called The Jungle, right? And in The Jungle was
Mm.
a book that came out of him getting hired as a worker inside of the Union Stockyards for several weeks and experiencing what it was like to be a worker and really,
Mm.
getting into it. He found horrific stuff, of course. If you read the book, you got a graphic depiction of what he experienced, not only for the workers, but also for the animals. And the book came out, and it was quite a, a quite a groundswell came out of the book, and so he showed a side of this industry that hadn't really been exposed before, and in a way, he was a great
Mhm.
pioneer for us because there's someone over 100 years ago that was doing undercover investigation of this industry who we would never give credit
Mm.
to, right? Because we look in the last 5 or 10 years, and that's about the bandwidth we have for history and
Yeah.
understanding our movement. But this guy really, Upton
Sure.
Sinclair was just such an innovative person, and he really changed our perspective. So in a way, I kind of see ourselves almost kind of carrying the torch of what he started. And to bring it to its logical conclusion would be, for us to create a slaughter-free city in the capital, in the city that used to once promote itself as the slaughter capital of the world. So it became for me like an experiment in grassroots activism, and also I realized that there was a huge potential for popular support with a campaign like this, because most people, even of course all those that eat meat, the slaughter part is the part of the industry that the inconvenient truth, the part they'd rather not know about, talk about. But everyone pretty much sees the stigma attached with slaughter and the slaughter industry. So there was a big potential to gain a lot of public support for it, which is appealing, because a successful movement needs public support. It needs a lot of support after it develops. And the other thing that was appealing to me is that it's inherently intersectional, uh, in that it brings in a lot of different groups that have a lot of different grievances with this industry because it's so horrible. So there's a lot of natural allies that can come into the picture. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the thinking behind slaughter free, and what we're doing is inherently political as well, because I think we're all doing. I think it's kind of an illusion to make a distinction between non-political activism and political activism, because certainly if we're asking for an end to an industry or reform of an industry, or where some people where jobs would be transitioned, where people's choices would change, we're talking about a political issue. There's no way that we can get around that, really. For
Yeah.
slaughter free, beyond closing slaughterhouses and transitioning to a plant-based food system, we've created a model of grassroots activism, or built on this, hopefully have built on the successes of other movements that we've learned from. And we're teaching people that model, how to use it in towns and cities. And it's about not more than just closing slaughterhouses. It's about learning how to exercise your constitutional rights, your rights to protest, to speech. It's about speaking truth to power, understanding how we confront people in power and not being afraid to do so, and challenging those existing power structures, and understanding how powerful decision makers operate and how to influence them. Because ultimately, if we want the kind of change that we say we want, which is meaningful, sweeping change, we want not just like 10% of the population to go vegan, but more than that, then we have to target the powerful decision makers in our food system, if we stand a chance to have that kind of change. So that's kind of the idea behind slaughter
Yeah.
free.
And the goal of slaughter-free cities, slaughter-free Chicago, slaughter-free, whoever's doing it, the goal is to have slaughterhouses banned from the area that you're operating in, with the activism is operating in. Am I right in thinking that's the end goal?
Yeah. So ultimately, the law to prohibit slaughterhouses would be kind of the way to memorialize the whole effort. It would be kind of probably the last step in the process. Actually, it's not the
Okay.
last step, because then after the law is passed, then there's vigilance, then there's making sure that the law doesn't get reversed and that things don't go backwards, which can happen in social movements. So it's very much towards the end, though, because you have to have enough public support to pressure the lawmakers to pass the bill, right? So just like in any other situation, you have to build the support for it and build the pressure in order for it to work.
So what is your tactic to do that? So from my understanding, or my initial kind of thoughts about this would be that, to get slaughterhouses banned, I would imagine first of all you would have to have the majority of the people in favor of of banning them, which on paper probably sounds pretty easy because most people like, oh yeah, I'm against killing, yeah. But then when it means they don't get a burger, maybe they change their mind, right? So how what is your strategy? How does it go then? So like, what's your first point of call? And your step by step to lead to the point where lawmakers are pressured to change that
Yeah,
law. So you mentioned you have a repeatable strategy, a grassroots kind of a strategy for that people can copy. What is that
right.
exactly?
So I would say that we kind of took a cue from the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King, who who whose strategy decided was going to be, we're going to start with a smaller goal in a local in an area where the injustice is very great. So in Montgomery, Alabama, and where they staged the the trying to change the bus system and make it desegregated. It was just in that town
Mhm.
where they started with that. And so what the strategy
Right.
was is if you start local and you can have a local success, and you can show the repression that comes from trying to make that small change locally, a change that most people agreed with, at least on principle, especially in the North, that yeah, everybody should be able to ride the bus regardless of color. But the
Mhm.
activism, the nonviolent activism, the disobedience, the sitting on the buses when they weren't supposed to be on those buses, the
Mhm.
backlash was so severe, and that it raised a lot of international media attention because people could see how severe the reaction was to something that seemed very civil and very dignified to most people, that they're not
Mhm.
leaving the bus because they feel they have a right to be on this bus. And so we took a cue from that successful movement and decided we start local. We have 13 slaughterhouses in Chicago, which is down from hundreds just a few decades ago. So the industry is on its way out pretty much. And so we thought it was a tangible goal to be able to end slaughter here by closing 13 slaughterhouses. And then once you have a success in one city, or even just a micro, like one closes down or one transitions to another kind of business, then you can start building on those smaller successes, and people start realizing, hey, if they can do that in the slaughter capital of the world, which was once the slaughter capital, then maybe we could do it in Baltimore, or in London, or Toronto. So the idea started spreading to different cities, and different city teams started popping up um, in different areas because they could see that there's actually a lot of support for closing slaughterhouses, and there's a wide range of constituents that don't want them for a variety of reasons. So there's actually
Mhm.
quite a bit of support. And yeah, what you mentioned about people wanting their burger, it's interesting because they don't necessarily connect that with slaughterhouses a lot of time.
Mhm.
They still want that product, but they're not connecting the closure of slaughterhouses with that often.
Right. Okay. So I guess that's kind of it's a benefit, really, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. We will come out with you and stop these slot. Great. Yeah. Why are burgers so much more expensive all of a sudden? I mean, so is that the kind of way it's going. So I guess okay. So as far as I'm understanding it, so that the goal, I'm just going to repeat it back to make sure I've grasped this properly. So the goal is to start small. You're not going for like all slaughterhouses in the entire USA, for example. You're going city by city, and I guess as this succeeds city by city, basically it means that those cities will most likely import from other cities, right? Imports the meat products, and the idea is that eventually, are you hoping to like drive the price up so that people won't want it, or are you also doing work with the public to try at the same time to try to convince them to not eat animal products? Like, I'm just wondering, yeah, like how does that work exactly with, because obviously if Chicago bans all slaughterhouses, people still, the meat will come from somewhere else, right? So what's the kind of plan around that at that point exactly?
So that what a lot of people don't realize is that the opportunities for slaughterhouses are limited, and that
Mm-hmm.
there's their options are running out, so to speak. So as
Okay.
development continues, residential development, urban development, sprawl, if you want to call it sprawl, throughout the world, because of the population increasing, there's less there's less properties for slaughterhouses. They're specifically zoned. There's
Right.
always a lot of controversy. We've been helped the small towns and cities defeat proposed slaughterhouses. We had a really great um, defeat in Carson City, Nevada, which is kind of like a tourist town, but it's all very Republican, very
Mm.
right wing. But we still spooked the city council to vote against it. So their options are kind of running out, and many people think that it's, oh, they can just move somewhere else. Well, it's really not that easy for them to find a property that is zoned for slaughter, and then go through this incredibly complex process of getting all these permits, and all of these things can go wrong at all these different stages. So it's really not
Mm-hmm.
quite that easy. And um, when new slaughterhouses are proposed, we often get emails and requests for help to set up a campaign. So we're not even dealing with activists at that point. We're just dealing with everyday people who don't know how to fight a situation like this, and we try to help them try to give them the tools and direction to carry out a campaign against it.
Because I guess this would be like an ordinary, most likely meat eating people that don't want a slaughterhouse in their
Right.
neighborhood, for obvious reasons. But I guess the reasons would be, I don't know, the sound, the smell, the seeing the animals going in. They just don't want the kind of unpleasantry of seeing all of that, right? Would I be right in assuming that that's the main reason they don't want to? They don't want it
There's
there.
lots of reasons. Those are many of them, and property values,
Mm.
quality of life, uh,
Okay.
all kinds of you know uh, problems that on our website we kind of go through them. But people
Mm.
change their mind too. I mean, a lot of people that have been involved in our campaign, or who have uh, been eating meat all their lives, or they're not very sensitized. They're pretty desensitized to the issues. Um,
Mm.
when they're confronted with the prospect of a slaughterhouse in their midst, it becomes a lot more real. They start thinking
Yeah.
about the whole process, and realizing that maybe this isn't just right. Maybe it's not just a problem in our town. Maybe it's a bigger problem, and that's the idea. Going back to the
Yeah.
Martin Luther King Jr. idea, is that a small
Hmm. Hmm.
problem in a local area becomes a story that has much broader implications, because it's done everywhere.
Mm.
There's that injustice. That injustice exists everywhere, but we have to defeat it somewhere very specific first, and
Mm.
successes in certain areas for it then to become to proliferate out from there.
I think it's great that you are able to work with not just activists and vegans, but actually are working with the average everyday public in a way that I never would have considered. I never would have thought about this way of connecting with someone, and having them open their mind to a different way of living, just from the fact that they don't want to see trucks with loads of animals going into a building next to their house every day. Like I never actually, made that click myself. That wow, that'd be a really good way to reach people. That's really great that they're coming to you even and saying, help us do this. It offers a great opportunity for you and your organization to explain to them, yeah, we can help. And by the way, have you thought about how this goes in the rest of the world, and how you don't need to pay for it? Actually, they wouldn't be opening it if you weren't paying for it. Yes, it's a great way to open there
Yeah, yeah,
into a
it's kind of
conversation.
a door opener a bit.
Mm.
The other thing too that I think is such an important thing for us to realize is that we are so small compared to, like, if you study social movements, and you there's a great uh, piece written by Bill Moyers in the 70s called the Movement Action Plan, and it's the 8 stages of a social movement that he outlines. And it's not a perfect, like, template that everybody uses or that every social movement plays out the same way, but it is a very useful way of looking at how social movements evolve in 8 stages. And we don't have the public support that we need, um, and we have to
Mhm.
find ways of. We don't necessarily have to agree, and we don't even have to build allies with people that share our values. But if we have a campaign to close a specific business like a slaughterhouse or make a city slaughter free, all we need our allies to do is to agree to the end goal, that we're all better off without those slaughterhouses in the city. And they could
Mm.
be all
Yeah.
different kinds of other, you know, they could be other movements, but we don't have the numbers that we need to succeed. If we look at social movements from, from a broader lens, and we look at what's
Mhm.
required of the successful ones to get big enough, we simply aren't anywhere near where we need to be in terms of, like, infiltrating and influencing the public at large.
Mhm.
But I think the way to get there is through the powerful people in our food system, because let them do the work for us. They're the ones that have the marketing machines and the media on their side. They need to be the spokespeople. We need to influence them
Mhm.
uh, to make, the decisions they make will affect millions of human lives and potentially billions of
Mm.
animals. So we need to really target those powerful people.
I actually was reminded of a part of your book actually when you were speaking about how so many people aren't in support of the goals, of for animal rights and switching to a plant-based food system, and it's because of the well, I mean, it's indoctrination, but the way you put it in your book was a much more advanced and detailed version of it. Normally we say people are indoctrinated, but you really went into like exactly what that means. And I especially liked the example you gave about that strategist Antonio Gramsci, who and this was really good. So I'm going to explain it for those who've not read the book, but it was talking about basically how fascism has succeeded, and basically it's not through brute strength and just force. It's actually through ideas, and the ideas is where the power comes from. It's that you can if you imprint an idea on people through all the different means that you can do this. There's many, especially today's world. There's so many ways to get an idea out and onto people, and fictional ideas like happy cows in the fields and happy chickens in the fields and all these things. That's where the power is, not just brute force. Actually, that's more powerful, isn't it? And that was a really interesting the examples of also actually I don't know how controversial you want to get, but there was a story from the you put in your book about this Nazi concentration camp where the Nazis were filming their own documentaries with these
Mm,
prisoners looking all clean and well dressed and happy, and then killing them a couple of days later, maybe after the documentary was made. So you know, it's eerily similar to what farmers do with their animals, right? They take videos and fields or whatever, and then they send them off to a slaughterhouse a couple of days later once they've used them for marketing purposes, and now they can be sold for. So it's no surprise that people aren't necessarily fully supportive as they should be, because we're dealing with billions of dollars of marketing from the other side, right? And you've actually worked on that side too. That you were working for
yeah.
marketing for McDonald's, Happy Meals, and Kraft Food. So you know how this works as well, right? You actually have seen it firsthand how they like indoctrinate through these images and these things. Tell us a bit about that, actually, what you learned from that
Yeah,
experience.
well, it was a different time in my, it feels like a different lifetime. It's been so long. It
Yeah.
was probably, so I'm in my mid 50s now. It was my mid 20s. So it was about 30 years ago when I was involved in this work. And at the time, I was a freelancer,
Yeah.
and you could make decent money freelancing at different ad agencies and creative agencies around the city. And so I
Mm.
found myself working for one place that had like United Airlines as a client, and McDonald's and Kraft Foods. And, um, you know, to be in some of these meetings and um, listen to the discussion, uh, what you find is that they've really studied this. They really understand, and there's something to learn here. I think from them, as evil as it can be, uh,
Mm.
they
Yeah.
really have seized upon the notion that they're selling ideas, not products. That the product is something that you purchase because you believe in what it stands for. And that's the most important takeaway,
Mm-hmm.
that we as activists or people that are in our community should glean from that, is that we're not selling products, and we can't rely on the market to make the kind of change that we want. I had an interesting discussion, kind of an ongoing discussion, with someone that I like a lot, um, and we were talking about the plant-based food um, market and how it's grown,
Mm-hmm.
and what were the reasons for that. And she said, well, it's very well documented that why the plant-based food market has grown. And I said, really? Show me your sources. I'm kind of interested in that. And then it got into a discussion that what I started to realize is she was only looking through this very narrow lens of what the market and the business community thinks is the reasons for the growth in the plant-based food market, not the
Mm-hmm.
more vast and complex um, influences for as activism, activism, decades of activism that has influenced people's hearts and minds and decisions. She wasn't factoring all
Mm-hmm.
of that stuff in, which isn't really impossible to measure.
Mm.
I mean, we could waste a lot of
Yeah.
time trying
Yeah.
to figure that out. And we can do market research surveys, but those are really quite a shallow way to understand the more complex and social change that we're looking for. Every
Mm-hmm.
major social change has required a social movement, with a lot of strategy and a lot of discipline and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
organization. And the market doesn't know anything about that. It's just looking at the
Sure.
results and saying, okay, how can we survey consumers so we can help them buy more diapers or buy more cars? That's not what we're doing. We shouldn't use, that's why we don't need those tools, because they're not designed for what we're doing, really.
So intuitively, you feel that the rise of plant based food. Do you believe that a good chunk of it has come from animal rights activism
Well, yeah, I
and
mean, here's the proof
um,
of that. Okay, look at the
okay.
humane washing and greenwashing. Look at the millions that are spent on
Mm.
appealing to people's sensibilities over their concern for the environment and their concern for animal suffering. If it was true that
Mm.
people didn't care, or if we weren't having an impact, then none of this would be necessary. But the fact is that
Mm-hmm.
more and more consumers are demanding, expecting, hoping for uh, products are that result in less suffering and less ecological damage.
Mm.
So if there's the
Yeah.
proof right there that we have. you know, we're looking at this company in California that sells chicken at an incredible cost. The luxury chicken.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, the chickens are no different. The situation is no different. The way they're raised and slaughtered, it's really
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah.
So we're trying to expose that myth that they've created, that marketing myth.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, the whole growth in humane and green advertising is the testament we need that people care and, you know, want those. They again, we're selling beliefs.
Do you think that some of this could have come from because so in recent years, especially in the last, or I guess the last between 5 to 8 years, let's say, there's been a big uptick in people caring about what other people think about like how virtuous they are, right? There's a lot of virtue signaling that's been popping up across social media. People want you to know that they support this and that, and they want you to know that they did something special today. And whereas I don't remember it being like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
before. You had the odd person that would show off about something, but now everyone wants to, they have in their Twitter bios, everything they support. Like it's crazy sometimes, like how many things that you can fit in there. So do you think this maybe being like do you think this is factored into that? I guess is what I'm trying to say. Do you think this is just one of many identities people have picked up for better or for worse? Obviously, in this case, it's definitely for better.
right.
But yeah, do you think an overall kind of change that's come and animals have come along with that as well as all these other things that people want to kind of show virtue in?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And perhaps it's
Mm.
also somewhat narcissistic because we have some problem with
Right.
narcissism. But
Yeah.
even then, um, like the fact that if this idea has become popularized that we are good people and we want to be perceived as good people, um, then
Mm.
then that's quite a kind of accomplishment, and that came from decades uh, of activism that is disruptive, that created tension.
Mm.
One point I
Mhm.
want to make is that every social movement gets a lot heavier and messier and more intense before it gets better. And so we
Mhm.
can't expect to make a major shift in people's hearts and minds without disrupting their thought process. And so
Mhm.
that's what advertising does. It disrupts us with TV and internet ads with things that we initially think we don't want, we don't give a shit about. But
Mhm.
when we see the ad
Mhm.
enough, several times, we realize, oh, I need that. That's disruption
Mhm.
successfully being used to change our minds about something. Advertising does it all the time. They got it from social psychology, and we should use it too because it's strategic. It works.
It's not a weapon for bad unless you're doing it for bad reasons, right? This is the thing. If you can, it's a strategy that can be used for good. It's I guess it's kind of like people breaking out of bad habits. That's a good way to do it is by constantly exposing them to something that's good, and then you'd hope that okay, well they pick up a good habit then, and then the bad habit goes away.
Right.
It's simple stuff, but unfortunately, like you said, advertisers use it in a negative way. They get you to pick up
That
things
are
that you,
useless.
you don't want or
Yeah.
need.
Right.
Right, completely.
Uh,
Yeah. And how are you? So what's give us some examples of the kind of actions that your organization does that in that light,
yeah.
like civil disobedience. And because I know of DXE, direct action everywhere. I've seen what they do. I've done some of the actions with them as well. So but yeah, give us an idea of the kind of things that your groups are doing.
Sure. So, you know, one of the things we did was I'll tell you about a campaign we had going. We always look for
Mhm.
when we have a campaign, we're always looking for all of the stakeholders, all of the people that have an interest in that brand. Or so in one case, it was they're building this big multi-million dollar slaughterhouse in Wisconsin, and
Mhm.
we really studied. They had a lot of different people working on this. Who are the suppliers? Who's the investors? Who are the insurers? Who are the will be the suppliers of the animals, and looking at all these different things. Well, what we
Mhm.
learned was that the company had been sold to an investment firm in Texas a huge majority is now owned. So they actually called the shots. And when we learned that, we decided to
Okay.
target the CEO of that investment firm. And for a year, we called and emailed him
Okay.
and did social media blasts, and we got no response. But then
Mhm.
we decided, our Slaughter Free Dallas people got together and we decided to do a protest at his home, at his mansion, I should say. Uh,
Right.
and
Wow.
that really rattled things. I called him a couple
Mm.
of days after that, and it was the first time he ever took my phone call. And the first 10 minutes
Okay.
call, the first 10 minutes of the call were him complaining about our tactics. It was very ironic. The only
Right.
reason why he took the call was because we had to resort to embarrassing him in front of his neighbors to show him that what he's investing in is wrong. You know, that the $74 million could be better invested in something else. And so it
Mhm.
took embarrassing him in front of his neighbors for him to even take our call. And we had a very productive call. It lasted about 45 minutes, and I talked to him. We listened to each other. I listened to his point of view. He listened to me. I told him about all the different reasons why I think it's a bad idea to invest in the slaughterhouse industry, and gave him other options. And at the end, he said, "I really I respect what you're doing very much, um, and maybe we can continue the conversation. We'll definitely take what you said into consideration, this and that." And then
Mm.
2 days later, the CEO announced that they were divesting from the $74 million slaughterhouse in Wisconsin and any slaughter investment in the future, no more investment in the industry. And that was it.
Wow.
Um, we didn't hear anything more from them, but that was a stunning upset. You know, an
Yeah.
example of how
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
can influence investors and people with the money in this industry that are investing in this industry,
Mhm.
and a small group of people can make a big change and send a message to their investors and to the industry that this is no longer business as usual.
And that wouldn't have taken, that many resources either. I mean, it's a lot. It's online work, obviously. It takes obviously on your side, there's a lot of strategy. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, for the average like me, an activist out there, it's not really such hard work to do it. Tweet storm or whatever. Just get loads if you tweet, and then the people who are local, okay, just go to his house for. It wouldn't take many trips outside of his house before he's like, okay, I don't want to do. I'm gonna speak to someone, please. I need to speak to somebody on the phone. He's not going to stand it for months, is he? Right? He's not. I don't think anyone's so stubborn to be able to handle that outside their house for so that's really yeah, wow, that's a really amazing result actually for what seems like, yeah, like I said, a pretty simple strategy, a pretty simple move from your groups. So right now I'm going to play a bit of devil's advocate because I think it's only fair that we represent some of the opinions that maybe, I mean, obviously we agree on practically everything here, and I'm fully supportive of all of this, but there are people out there who definitely aren't, and I think it's only fair we give some airtime to a few of these comments that are going to most likely crop up. So first off, with the example you just gave, I guess you probably had this, and I guess you have this a lot when you do these things. But when people are saying they think this is harassment, right? This is this kind of barrage of online action, and then going to the guy's house, they would say this is harassing the person, and vegans harass people. They say vegans harass people, and then they get upset when they get harassed back. For example, like just recently, Tash Peterson, who's an activist in Australia, she was sent a picture of a decapitated pig's head with her name stuck to the head, and she went and confronted the person who did it. And I posted this video just today, and already in the comments, someone said she goes around harassing people. She can't complain when she gets harassed. Right. So this is this is the kind of attitude we're dealing with. So how do you respond to that? Someone who's maybe not that bad, like not a complete idiot, like anti-vegan, but maybe just a general member of the public who's like, isn't this harassment what you guys are doing? Like, what would you respond to that?
Yeah, there's always going to be people that that don't see the value in disruptive confrontational action. But as I said before, no other
Mm.
social movement in history has ever succeeded without heightening the conflict. It's what Erica Chenoweth, the social scientist who has studied social movements in the last 100 years, it's what she calls constructive conflict. And the idea is that
Mhm.
you can't even get the issue on the table until you create enough tension where people are all of a sudden feel forced to that they have to talk about it. So, like an
Mm.
example in history is when the famous suffragette activist, spit in the eye of a police officer. That was a strategic move. We don't do that, by the way, but that was a strategic move to get the issue into international headlines, to get people, and then
Mhm.
a huge discussion ensued about women's rights to vote. So we do things that are symbolic, that are daring, that are actually quite risky for ourselves, knowing that it will raise the discussion, the public discussion.
Mhm.
Now the trick is to do something that the public finds um, kind of interesting and thought provoking, rather than something they can
Mm.
dismiss as silly or stupid. We want to do
Mhm.
things that
Okay.
evoke their emotions and get them to think and say, "Wow, that's kind of a powerful action. That's kind of a powerful move, confronting the mayor of Chicago in that way." Um, you want their
Mm.
sympathy. You want their respect. That you had the audacity to interrupt that powerful person's speech, and while she's talking about how great she has solved crime in the city and all these other things, you disrupt her and with something that, yes, some people will be very upset about, but many people will
Mm.
walk away and saying that took a lot of courage to do that. And you know what? Or, by the way,
Mm.
that
Mm.
person's message is right. There shouldn't be slaughterhouses in 2022. If the city is serious
Mhm.
about its green initiative, its climate emergency declaration, then it's going to do X, Y, and Z. And yeah, that person's right. So that's the
Mhm.
outcome we want. Of course, we're not going to get it all the time, and
Mm.
the press is always going to turn us into something of. They're always going to look for ways of making us look silly. But uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Of
when
course.
we control the narrative and when we do things that are interesting and innovative and creative rather than repetitive, then
Mhm.
then we start building the support, the public support we need, and that's
Mm.
ultimately what this is about.
I'm guessing you wouldn't be a fan of, for example, the vegetable party protests that were happening in England a year or so ago. Did you see that at all? The people dancing around dressed as vegetables to try to. I don't. It was to raise awareness. So, would that be an example of something you would say is going to be written off as stupid and silly by most people? Am I right in thinking that's or would you say that there's some benefit to something like that? I personally, I can put myself out there on first if you like. I was very critical of that. I actually publicly said that this was really dumb, and I don't, maybe a few people were interested, sure, but I think the majority were just like, what, why, what is
Yeah,
this, you know?
I didn't see it.
Yeah,
You know, I was listening to something every day. I'm listening to new like podcasts and stuff, but I'm a student. I'm
yeah.
trying to be the student of social change and activism and learn every day from others. And on the one hand, we want to be respected. Uh, we want to rally a core base. We need more activists, and we need more committed, disciplined people. And it's a serious topic. And on the other hand, we need to
Mhm.
be very uh, we need to be letting people in. So we need to find ways of making things that like older people, which can be incredible activists, people that are retired and have a lot of time on their hands. Um,
Mm.
People might
Yeah.
feel that in some social movements, people brought their families and kids.
Mm.
So when everyday people start participating in the social movement, we start to grow a lot. And if we could find ways to do that
Mm.
more, then we succeed in building more public support. I don't know if dressing up in vegetable
Mm.
costumes achieves that, but
Yeah, maybe. Hey,
uh,
that's the best argument for it that I've heard yet. Like if that was the goal, it was to open it up and make a family friendly event, have more that then fair enough. Okay, you've won me
yeah,
over. If that's why they did it, then I would consider hosting my own vegetable party protest to get based on
I
that.
could see it as a maybe an eggplant.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. No, yeah, that's the most convincing argument. And then I've got another contrary opinion for you. You know, one that I imagine would come up a lot. So all right. Earlier on, we did identify most people, most reasonable people, don't want a slaughterhouse in their backyard. They don't want one anywhere near where they live. They don't want to see it. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to smell it for obvious reasons. Most people are in that boat. However, there may be some people out there that are not happy with the city losing all their slaughterhouses because of the things I mentioned earlier, because they feel like their freedom is being infringed on, right? They say, I want to eat meat. So why are you getting rid of all these slaughterhouses? And also, you also mentioned with these powerful people to get those people to start doing the work for the organization because they can influence and stuff. These kind of people would say you're infringing on my freedom would also, and I think sometimes they have a point here, would call out that a lot of these powerful people, politicians, are monstrous hypocrites when it comes to what they say versus what they do. And you know, although I think these people I'm referring to oftentimes are just screaming and shouting about not too much, this is one point that I have actually had to agree on them with them on a few times. That okay, there's like for example, Eric Adams, you know, was pushing all this plant-based stuff, and then he revealed he's eating fish at really fancy restaurants, you know, and it really doesn't look good, does it, when he's like doing that? So yeah, I guess two pronged kind of question here. Firstly, how do you deal with people who say it's my freedom and stop trying to shut down slaughterhouses? I want them to stay here so I can get my cheap meat. And two, how do you deal with say like if you're influencing these politicians, and how do you handle the fact that some of them are doing this for political points and actually, you know, people might call them out for being massive hypocrites because they don't practice what they preach?
Right. So to the first point, I think that we don't deal with. Um, I mean, we should make the best arguments that we can and put out the best
Mm-hmm.
information that we can and use the best sources that we find. But we shouldn't be
Mm-hmm.
focusing on people that are antagonistic to uh, to our cause or our campaign. We should be focusing on people that are somewhat either remotely or very sympathetic, people that are likely to become involved because just like they do in marketing and advertising, you focus on your
Mm.
target market, not your laggards, not the people that will never buy your product or maybe they'll start buying it 50 years from now, right? So there's
That's great advice. That's great advice, by the way. I think so many people out there, both activists and non-activists, waste their time on people that have absolutely no intention of listening to them. It's such good
yeah,
advice.
yeah.
Yeah,
Second
yeah.
part of what you were saying is in terms of freedom, not taking away an industry. I mean, this is the backlash that we get, that every social movement, that every activist group gets from demanding that a certain injustice be corrected, faces the same kind of backlash. We're not unique in that. We should, if we
Mhm,
look at a
mhm,
broader perspective on this, we find community with a lot of other activism groups, a lot of others fighting for justice. And what we realize
mm,
is that we're all dealing with that. And uh, do you have the right? Do you feel that you have the right to oppress or retaliate or harm someone else? And that's kind of ultimately what it boils down to, whether it's a movement
mm,
or another one. And so
mhm.
we have to make the case for why the justice needs to be corrected and focus on our talking points, and not.
Mhm.
And if they feel like they have the freedom or need to have the freedom to harm, I think we seriously question the idea that someone has a right to harm or a right to benefit or
Okay.
profit from the harm when there's so many other even more lucrative ways of uh, running a business that's slaughter free.
And how about these politicians then? Yeah, how would you deal with this kind of? This is the only valid criticism I'd say. If there were any that these people tend to bring up, I'd say this one I kind of sympathize with, because it's not nice to be told you shouldn't be doing something by someone who's doing that thing, which tends to be the case with most politicians, right?
Well, here's the thing. Let me give you a concrete example. We're dealing with a situation in
Mm,
Los Angeles where there was a ban on slaughterhouses in LA, proposed in
mhm,
2020. It ended up in the committee, where it gets voted on first, and there's three people in that committee, and the chair of that committee controls what gets on the agenda and what gets voted on, and his name is Council Member Lee. Um, Lee has uh, decided that he's going to try to kill this motion, and so what we've done here is we've launched a pressure campaign to expose his attempt to kill this. Did he make some kind of deal with the chicken
mhm,
slaughter association that we don't know about? What is
mm,
it that, and why is he protecting 20 business owners over entire communities that he claims to care about? In other words, if you truly are a
mm,
progressive person that cares about these marginalized communities and the environment in which they live, um, why are you throwing them under the bus just to protect these 20 business owners? And ultimately, we
mm,
we put the pressure back on the target of our campaign when they try to make us look
mhm,
like we're dividing, um, we're harming these business owners. No, the city has programs to
mm,
help business owners transition and in many other ways. So use those resources, and for the greater good,
mhm,
and for all the marginalized people that you claim to care about, help vote for it just for them, if nothing else. Don't protect
mhm.
these 20 business owners.
Yeah.
That would be our.
Got it. Got it. Got it. And so and for the people, and then flipping that around, so we got this guy would is acting hypocritically against you. Um, what about when they're acting hypocritically but in favor of you? What about when a politician is supportive of you, but people start to point out that this politician's hypocritical in their own personal life? So, for example, a politician is, which I'm sure it happens, like Eric Adams, for example, who would probably is supporting. I don't know if he already is behind you, but he would be, I guess, where he'd say, "Yeah, let's get rid of slaughterhouses," and then the dude's off eating animal products, and it was at least fish, but who knows what else. And imagine someone is eating steaks and meat and barbecue, but also fighting to end slaughterhouses. People might call a double standard here and say, well, it's one rule for them, the rich, and one rule for us, the poor. This is a criticism I've seen come up that I do empathize with. Have you had this before, and if so, like, how would you combat that situation?
So let me make sure I understand this. So what you're saying is
Yeah.
that they're going to frame that, so that the politician is trying to frame the issue as that we are somehow against that community. Um,
No, sorry. No, no, no. I think so. So what I mean is, I said, so I'm referring to earlier. I'll try and like. So you said you want to influence powerful people because they already can influence a lot of people, right? So my worry with that, or what I've seen already with that, is that some powerful people would support you because they believe, because whatever the reason is, right? Maybe it's for virtue signaling. Maybe they genuinely believe
right,
that we should have slaughter-free cities, right? So they're supporting you, they're promoting you, they're trying to push bills and trying to work on your behalf. But then they themselves are eating meat, eating all animal products, going to fancy restaurants and things like that, as most of these powerful people
right.
do. The general member of the public is going to feel very, probably quite angry about that, or some of them would, to say this rich elite person is telling me and trying to shut down, these slaughterhouses and telling us to stop eating meat or whatever. But they go and dine at these fancy restaurants and eat all this meat. It's one rule for them and another rule for us. you know, um, I feel like a lot of the times vegans and at least plant-based diet, vegan organizations, vegan companies, we kind of get lumped in with these kind of elites and this elite hypocrisy.
Right.
Um, because of these elite people tend to, they push climate diets like plant-based diets, but they don't eat it
Yeah.
themselves. Right. So I'm wondering, have you come across this and this kind of criticism? Because you're in the political
No,
world, right? So people are going to, pull this kind of thing up, right?
the attention is on that person, that public figure. It doesn't.
Mm.
We don't automatically get blamed because they made a bad decision. So I think the
Okay.
public
Okay.
recognizes that we're trying to advance a certain objective or goal using that
Mm.
political figure or public figure because they have the power to help us do that. But that
Mm.
doesn't make us responsible for like all of their behavior outside of their role as a public figure. We can't possibly control that. We could say, hey, that's not a
Mhm.
great thing that they did that. That looks like a step backwards. Um, but
Sure.
yeah, I
Sure.
mean, I don't. We've never confronted a situation where you know people hold us accountable for um, a bad decision that a public figure made. So, for example, like
That's
we
good
had
then.
a sponsor for our bill in Chicago to ban slaughterhouses, and he dropped out.
Mm.
He dropped out of sponsorship,
Okay.
which you could say, you know, could be a bad reflection on us. But um, I guess the way we tried to frame it is like this guy didn't have the courage to continue, even when he faced the odds. Like even when he faced,
Mm.
you know, obstacles and pushback, he could have fought for it because it's the right thing to do. But he dropped out. So we kind of,
Okay.
it depends on how you frame it. But I don't think people hold us
Sure. Sure.
accountable for what other powerful people do.
Yeah, that's it's good. You'd hope people would operate with some common sense with this kind of thing, but I've seen a lack of it also. So I was curious to know if you'd faced that at all. And no, it's great that you have a way around that. It sounds great, honestly. The organization, how you run it, the strategies. It sounds like it's very well thought out. I mean, obviously, I read your book as well, Farm to Fable, so I know you know your shit. So it was really good reading that, and I highly recommend it. And we've not got into it too much today, but honestly, I think we could do an entire podcast on just the book. I mean, probably a 3 or 4 hour podcast even, because there's so much in there to it really is a great book. So for anyone who's let's say some people out there like casual fans of Earthling Ed, or some videos of myself doing outreach and things like that, and if you're wondering where do you get these kind of arguments from, how do you know what to say, you could go ahead and get Earthling Ed's ebook. That's true. But if you want to go really, really deep into this, and I'm talking way more levels deep than any book I've seen, then I highly recommend Robert's book, Farm to Fable, because you'll come out of it much more knowledgeable on all of the counterpoints and all of the arguments. And yeah, I was reading it, man, and honestly, it's so in depth. It's by far the best I've seen dealing with all of these common things that we come across as animal rights and vegans. So it's really well done, and it's from 2016, right?
Yeah, it came out in 2016,
You wrote it.
and
Yeah, it's aged very well because it's still completely relevant. Like there's nothing, in my opinion, there was nothing dated in it at all. It's all 100% relevant for today as well. Really good.
wow, thank you. Yeah, that's quite. Thanks for the positive feedback. I feel like being 7 years old, there's a lot of room for improvement, and like some of
Mm,
my thoughts have evolved since then too. But you can't
cool.
really, you can't really, you just kind of have to let it be for what it is. Like it's a piece that I wrote at the time in my life, and maybe I'll update it someday. I'd like to look at it again and kind of update it. do a new edition.
Well, yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. I especially liked you used a few pop culture references as well. I especially liked using the Jesse in Breaking Bad example to talk about judgment, and people say, "Oh, you're judging me," and it's like using that example as like a you know, it was little things like that. I think really helped it along as well, and especially more serious examples, like I said earlier, the one with the Nazis, when you're talking about the domestication of turkeys. And actually, indigenous. That's something I'd love to get into actually, and a more because the whole people one of the arguments that's really getting some steam now is this whole veganism as anti-indigenous, and indigenous is romanticized as this beautiful way of living, but your book absolutely destroys that narrative. I've not seen such a thorough destruction of nonsense as I have in your book. In some sections, that one was brilliant, talking about, you know I'll summarize the turkey part just for people to know that basically indigenous tribes domesticated turkeys, but not for food, for fashion. So the argument that indigenous people only do what they need to do to survive, well, no, that's not necessarily true. That as Native Americans domesticated turkeys just to take their feathers off them and use them for fashion. So, just there's lots of great paragraphs like that and great points in there. So I highly recommend it. Really do. And thank you for coming on. It's been great to learn about your organization. There's definitely probably another 4 or 5 hours we could get into, but in a nutshell, it was really good to understand what you're doing. And is there anything I've missed that you'd like to get to mention before we close off?
Yeah, I would just say if people are interested in slaughter-free cities, they can go to slaughterfreecities.org and sign up there. They could follow us on Facebook as well. But yeah, there's lots of different opportunities to get involved. There's a role for everyone. That's in our community of activism. There's a role for people who cook, for who nurture, who do music and provide pleasure and entertainment, as well as people on the front lines doing some more risky stuff. But there's a role for everybody, and you know, getting involved can mean a lot of different things to different people. So, would love to encourage people to learn more about it.
I'm sure people will do. You've very really impressed me with everything that you're doing. I think it's great. I think you're doing amazing work, and thank you for doing it. I know I have a kind of inkling of how difficult it is. I've not organized at quite the level you have, but I've been involved in a little bit of this, and I know how nerve wracking and tough it
Yeah,
is. And people, people's jobs and careers and lives and mental health is on the line. And so I really, it's really impressive what you're doing. And yeah, you got all my support. I look forward to seeing what you'll be up to next, and I'll definitely be following across all the social media. We'll stay in contact as
yeah,
well.
that would be great. Thanks so much for having me on, David.